Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to DreamWorks Switch to Life. And today we are finally going to be reviewing Kung Fu Panda 4, the final installment of the Kung Fu Panda franchise. And I gotta say, just watch this the day it came out. I love it. It was awesome. And while I do have some gripes with the film, it's more so the fact of where I wanted the film to go rather than the actual film itself. I really enjoyed this movie and it was really great. The animation alone makes this thing worth watching because this happens to have the best animation out of the entire Kung Fu Panda franchise, and that's awesome. What makes it even more impressive is the budget. The first movie had $130 million, the second had 150, and the third had 145. The fourth movie only had $85 million. I don't know if that's a testament to how far DreamWorks has come or how much care they put into this movie, but either way, it's amazing what they did. In terms of music, well, it's nice. I mean, I really enjoyed listening to the music, especially the end credits song, but unfortunately, it's not as nostalgic as it was back in the original trilogy, so still, really enjoyable, and I loved the music. And then there's also the voice acting, which I really loved. We had Jack Black, Awkwafina, Dustin Hoffman, James Hong, Bryan Cranston, and of course, my personal favorite out of the entire movie was Viola Davis as the chameleon. She was awesome. Not to mention the fact that due to the fact her character kept changing shape, that meant her voice had to keep changing as well. So while the main voice of the chameleon, Viola Davis, was awesome, it was even better that her character kept changing voices every time she would change rather than sticking to the same voice. However, one thing that I wish they did do with her character was give her an actual name. They gave actual names to the villains of the first three movies. How come the chameleon doesn't get her own name? And they even got Ian McShane to come back to voice Tai Lung in this movie, which was definitely the best inclusion in this movie. Now it's time to talk about the action, and the action is kind of a mixed bag. Sure, it was awesome, funny, and definitely cool to watch, but at the same time, it was nowhere near as good as it was back in the first movie, which is really sad. Granted, it makes sense considering who the villains of each respective movie are. It would make sense that Tai Lung, who uses martial arts, would have better action sequences than someone like Shen and Kai, who use blades, and the chameleon, who uses shape-shifting magic. However, one major reason that this film took so long to release, and I believe it's a great payoff, was that this film has the best camera movement out of any of the Kung Fu Panda movies. Because instead of going for simplistic, just have the characters in frame, they're trying to move the camera with the characters, so we're in the action with the characters, seeing it from their perspective. According to the directors, they called it the Go-Po instead of the GoPro, which is funny, but at the same time, really awesome. This film was meant to be like a roller coaster for us. We were in the action with Po, and I got that feeling throughout watching this movie, and I really enjoyed that. So overall, I thought this film was amazing and definitely worth watching, but unfortunately, at the same time, I do have a few problems with it. Granted, it's not problems with the film itself, it's more problems with where I think the film could have gone instead of the actual film. Still, I'm really happy with the film that we did get, and I definitely enjoyed it. So with that in mind, it's time to move into spoiler territory, and for those of you who are wondering, the Furious Five were barely in the movie. They didn't have any lines whatsoever. They just appeared for a few seconds at the very end during the end credits song, where they were training alongside Po and Jen. And I gotta say, I was actually really happy with that. Now, I wish the Furious Five could have been in the movie more, but at the same time, I'm happy that they were not in Poe's adventure in this movie, as their inclusion would have taken away from Jen's character arc. And Jen is a really awesome character, and it was really cool to watch her story unfold. And I just loved it. Having the Furious Five there would have taken away that character, and she wouldn't have gotten her chance to shine, which is great that they decided not to include the Furious Five, as it actually did give Jen that chance to shine. But where have they been in this movie? Well, at the very beginning, Poe simply says that they're all off on their own missions doing their own thing, with the exception of Mantis, who's trying to run away from his bride who's trying to eat his head. Hopefully they'll be more involved with Kung Fu Panda 5. I mean, they have to. It's the Furious 5 and Kung Fu Panda 5. But speaking of, this movie had a lot of sequences that called back to the original trilogy, and I really enjoyed that, especially during the Furious 5 sequences, where they were trying to teach Jen the moves that they were doing in the training hall in the first movie. So what exactly are my issues with the film? Well, it mostly comes down to the fact that there were some things I wished happened in the movie that didn't. But really, I'm happy with the movie that we did get. So with that in mind, there are two things that I wish could have happened in this movie. The first is I wanted Shifu to die. What? Yes, that's a very unpopular opinion, I get that, but think about it. Throughout the movie, Shifu was just kind of there. He didn't actually do anything aside from, say, Poe has to retire from being the Dragon Warrior. Aside from that, he did absolutely nothing. Personally, I would have loved it if he was in the final battle, was killed, and moved on to the spirit realm, and thus Poe had to actually step up and become the next spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace, while at the same time, Jen would take over the role as the next Dragon Warrior. But the thing is, Shifu is still alive, which probably means that they're trying to save his story for the 5th or maybe even the 6th movie. So, I don't know. Maybe there's something more going on that we need to figure out, but at the same time, Shifu's character didn't really do much, and personally, I think it would have been better in this movie if he died, but who knows? Maybe they're saving that for the 5th movie. Another thing that I wish they could have happened was some acknowledgement of the TV shows. I mean, I went into this movie thinking that this film was going to be a prequel to the two Kung Fu Panda TV shows, The Paws of Destiny and The Dragon Knight, during which Poe goes by the title Dragon Master, not Dragon Warrior. So, for some reason, I went in thinking that Poe would retire as Dragon Warrior and then take on a new title at the end of the film known as Dragon Master, which did not happen, and I wish it did. It wouldn't have been too hard to include that, but they didn't, which is really frustrating, especially because Jack Black, who literally voiced Poe in both The Dragon Knight and Kung Fu Panda 4, didn't bother bringing that up. And then there's the dynamic between Li Shan and Mr. Ping. Throughout the TV shows, we see them fight and bicker, but throughout the movie, we see a loving co-dad relationship, and I'm happy about that, but at the same time, it doesn't really acknowledge what happens in the TV show, which is really frustrating. But yeah, aside from those two things, I really enjoyed this movie, and I honestly think that this movie was awesome. Definitely worth watching, and I cannot wait for them to come out with Kung Fu Panda 5 and Kung Fu Panda 6. Yes, we are going to get 2 more Kung Fu Panda movies. We've known this since 2011. And even the director of the 4th film, Mike Mitchell, believes that this will not be the final movie if it becomes a box office success, which pretty sure it will. And then, of course, there's the story in this movie, which I really enjoyed, especially its writing and pacing, and it was just really good, and I gotta say, I loved it. I also enjoyed the pacing. It didn't feel rushed, it didn't feel dragged, it felt perfect. Now, on to the actual story itself. It starts when Po saves a village from a manta ray, and then he celebrates his success with his fans, only to discover that Shifu is about to tell him that he needs to retire from being the Dragon Warrior so he can ascend to the spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace. But in order to do that, he has to pick his successor, which is a problem since he can't really find anyone who he believes to be a worthy candidate. And then enter Zhen, a crafty fox who tries to steal the Staff of Wisdom from Po before Po defeats her and she ends up being thrown in prison, but not before Tai Lung ends up attacking a rock quarry, and thus Zhen gives him a small clue that hints towards something weird. And Po checks out the scene and he realizes that Tai Lung's footprints kept changing. So he contacts Zhen and says that she knows something, and Zhen tells him about the chameleon. So now Po has to go on a journey partnered with Zhen to go take down the chameleon, and they do that by traveling to this inn where they get a boat to take them to Juniper City, which is Zhen's hometown. And after learning a little bit about Zhen's history, the two of them manage to go into the Palace of the Chameleon, where it turns out that Zhen was actually working for the chameleon the whole time. Totally something that I predicted going into this movie, but still, it was really cool to watch that unfold. Zhen hands the staff over to the chameleon, at which point the chameleon and Zhen partner up to kill Po, which is a problem because Zhen actually started to have feelings for Po. Not romantic feelings, it's just like how you would care for a friend. So what is the chameleon's plan? Well, it turns out that she wanted to be a kung fu master, but literally no one would take her in due to her small size and stature. And I mean, if Mantis can be a kung fu master, why not a chameleon? I mean, surely Master Oogway would have taken her in, but no. So instead, the chameleon decided to become a sorceress, and she then used the powers of shapeshifting to get her way. However, her whole goal this time was to become a kung fu master, and since no one could teach her, she would have to take kung fu. And while she can easily become kung fu masters, she can't actually do kung fu without taking it from those masters. So she uses the Staff of Wisdom to access the spirit realm, where she summons a bunch of evil villains from Po's past, including Tai Lung, Kai, Shen, and pretty much everybody you can think of. A ton of villains that we've never even met, which is really cool. And she takes their kung fu powers away, basically becoming the ultimate kung fu master. Not only due to the fact that she has a bunch of kung fu techniques, but also because she can still shapeshift into any of those kung fu masters. Which actually reminds me, why couldn't we get any of the villains from the Kung Fu Panda TV show, Legends of Awesomeness? Well, I thought about it and I realized there aren't a lot of villains who actually died. Most of them were just sent to Chorgom prison. And the one villain who actually did die, Kipa the Demon King, I don't think the chameleon had a cage big enough for him, so yeah. And the villains from the other TV shows, those TV shows hadn't happened yet, so those villains aren't dead. Anyway, Po reunites with his fathers, who have been tracking him throughout the film this whole time, and then they all make a plan to go back to the chameleon's fortress so that Po can claim the Staff of Wisdom and stop the chameleon. Unfortunately, that also meant confronting her army of villains, which, now that Zhen had technically betrayed the chameleon, she decided that they needed to get an army of their own, so she recruited her old den of thieves to help fight in the battle against the chameleon's Komodo warriors. And then Po ends up going into the final battle against the chameleon alongside Zhen, and together the two of them try to defeat the chameleon, and it eventually turns into a kaiju battle. But unfortunately, during that battle, Po ends up losing to the chameleon as he gets trapped in a cage, which means it's up to Zhen to defeat the chameleon. And Zhen rises to the occasion and manages to wound the chameleon, only to discover that Po could have escaped the cage the entire time. He was just being a faker and giving Zhen a chance to shine before he dealt with the final move with his popular skadoosh. And so all of the kung fu villains from the past get their kung fu back from the chameleon, and then they get out of their cages and they all bow to Po in respect, which makes sense considering that the chameleon managed to defeat them and Po defeated the chameleon. So yeah, but unfortunately, one thing that I wish could have happened was that some of the villains would want to stay in the mortal realm and try to fight Po to make sure that happens. That didn't happen, actually. Every single villain wanted to go back to the spirit realm. Something tells me that there's a bit of enlightenment going on in the spirit realm, since all of the villains want to stay in the spirit realm and not return to the mortal realm, which is kind of weird if you ask me. Still, every single villain, including Tai Lung, who definitely got redeemed in this movie, while still feeling authentic to his character in the first movie, they all decided to return to the spirit realm, and they took the chameleon with them, which is really great. And thus, the movie ends with Po returning to the Valley of Peace to declare that Zhen will be the next Dragon Warrior, and the training session with Po, Zhen, and the Furious Five begins while the end credits roll. And yeah, that's pretty much the gist of the movie. You still have your funny scenes, your emotional scenes, your action scenes, all of which add screen time and make the movie that much better. So is this film the best of the series? Well, again, that's mostly a matter of opinion, but to be honest, it's up there. Honestly, though, it's really hard to rank the movies since every single one of them is a masterpiece, including this new film. So with that in mind, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and far more importantly, I hope that you guys enjoy watching Kung Fu Panda 4 for yourselves, because it's really good and I highly recommend going to theaters to watch it. But with that in mind, I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video, and who knows, maybe later this month I will be making Kung Fu Panda 5 predictions, or maybe not, depending on if you guys want to see that. Leave a comment down below. But most important of all, make sure you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
I'll take that. Think this belongs to you?